So I got to start with, number one, it's an honor and a privilege to even be a part of this. Violence Transformed, I participated in a few things. Love Mary Harvey to death. She wanted to remind me, October 29th is a concert at Jordan Hall, so definitely get that information. So I said, let me make sure I take notes before I forget, but love Mary Harvey to death. But before I even begin this artist talk, I wanted to say something, acknowledge somebody who's not here with us right now. Considering that this show is about Violence Transformed, we definitely need to take a moment to acknowledge someone who was just recently a victim of a really horrendous assault at Franklin Park. And that's Jean Clark. If it wasn't for her, that mural at LS that we worked on wouldn't exist at the high school I teach at. And she definitely, at that age, she is a warrior and she's a fighter and she's in my thoughts and prayers. I hope she's in you all's too. So I want to acknowledge Jean McGuire. Let's Sometimes we're reminded we live in a dangerous place where even our elder queens and kings can be assaulted because people are losing their sense of morals and values. Because that's what this is about. So I wanted to make sure I brought that up. The video you're seeing now, it wouldn't have been possible to have been made when I was in graduate school if it wasn't for my good friend Lee Weinstein, who helped put this together. He's right here in the front. You can ask him how he put it together, how many hours it took us, and everything, but it was part of my thesis presentation. In 2002, 2003, I started writing on Chinese rice paper scrolls my observations about the war on terror. This was post 9/11. So I had some students who would challenge me, who would say, yeah, you're probably pro-Saddam, or you're probably pro-terrorist if you're not pro-American. And there was this whole talk about freedom fries and all that, and I don't want to bring us too far back because I don't want to depress us. But as we got into those conversations, and this black guy with a terrorist-sounding name, Barack Hussein, who was running for president, I said, you know what, I'll get back to you about all these things. This was afterwards. So this scroll is afterwards, where I said, I want to talk about something positive, someone who's inspiring people. So this was what was in my thesis show. The other section beforehand, when Bush was president, yeah, I don't want to depress everybody if I go over it in my sections on Dick Cheney and their policies. So I said, when Lee helped me put it together, let's focus on a section that's more positive, hope and change. Sounds like that was a million years ago when you look at when we've gone through the last 4. It feels like a million years ago. So a lot of what you're seeing here is the scroll from 2008, my thoughts and my notes. So when you see these boxes here, up there at the top, that's Billy Jack. That was a movie series that came out in the 70s that my father and my mom took me to see. Oh, you got your hand raised. Yeah. He was like a superhero to me when I was a kid, fighting for what's right. And he believed in the philosophy of Martin Luther King, but he knew karate, he'd knock you in the head. So it was like, oh, this actually works.
Violence.
And so that's what it was. And then some of the things I'm writing were reflections of things I was observing and notes I was learning and I was reading. All right, so as you see a lot of the stuff, and it's hard because it moves kind of quick, I start going back into the past, particularly when it comes to what's the role of the government towards me as a black man. And whenever I think about, well, what's the role of the government towards me as a black man, the first thing I think of, well, historically, what's the role of the government towards me as a black man? And once I do that, I get scared, I get nervous, I get mad, then I get scared again. Because we're all citizens, every single one of us in this room, large extent of citizens. But there's always an asterisk when it comes to African Americans. Now, unfortunately, considering the Roe v. Wade decision, there's going to start being an asterisk on some of other folks here. So, as you're watching the video, I start thinking about people like Josephine Baker here, who was a dancer, singer, but a pioneer when it came to helping with the French resistance during World War II and helping support Dr. King in 1963, and how significant she is. Because at a certain point, I was like, if I'm going to do this, make it visually compelling enough that people who see it are going to have questions and go, well, who is this? Who's that? And then it becomes a history lesson, because I'm a school teacher. I teach high school. If I weren't an art teacher, trust me when I tell you I'd be the shortest serving history teacher, because they'd have fired me by now. Because I want to talk about the stuff that offends and it makes people uncomfortable. I want to talk about the reality. When people say, oh, critical race theory, that's evil, that's wrong. No, let's talk about the reality of what America is about. And I wouldn't let it go. These ones here, child soldiers, but in the past I had fake gangsters come, fake gangsters go. So you see Dick Cheney in the back. Everyone loves to say, oh, the black kid with the AR-15 who's in Africa doing whatever is horrible, but I'm like, a corporation that destroys people's lives is more horrible and devastating than that. Yeah, see, people are hearing me. People are hearing me. Governor Deval Patrick signed this part over here. I got to meet him at my friend Tito Jackson's rally. One of the things one of my relatives told me, this was my mom and one of my cousins, was get people to sign it. It's very interesting if you can get people to sign it. So Governor Patrick, and at a certain point, I used to go to comic conventions with my best friend. I met former wrestling champ Bruno Sammartino from the 60s. Yes. Like, let me get Bruno to sign it. That would be kind of weird. Does it matter? How does he fit in? I love pop culture. I'm putting Bruno in there. He loved it. He was just like, oh my God. And so I ended up putting people, and then people who I regret have long since passed, such as Eartha Kitt. If you know much about Eartha Kitt, the dinner at Lyndon Johnson's house, when his wife, Lady Bird, asked some questions and was like, why are these Negroes riding up the street? No, and she told the truth. And Lyndon Johnson tried to destroy her career over it because she spoke truth to power. So a lot of this I took thing with. Sometimes I was reading certain things, and again, it's about what was happening in our society during the war, but also culturally what's happening that forces us to say, okay, I'm a loyal American, I'm going to support this military excursion. You get people like Don Imus, who says, you know, there's nappy-headed hoes, referring to black women at Rutgers. And there's the other people, the one who said the thing about Chip Saltzman for the Republican Party trashing Barack Obama with the song Barack the Magic Negro that they were playing, like Puff the Magic Dragon. I'm like, let me write this down. You know, I'm like, I want to write it down because eventually, if I exhibit this, and ideally, I would love to exhibit this in a football field, between two states, if possible, that it's straight like this, not broken up and folded into sections, that it's straight like this. So the argument would be, you know, as a black man, over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, however long it takes me to finish this, are you willing to take that excursion and walk a mile in my views? Not just my shoes, because you never will. None of you will ever be a black man in America. Some of us obviously are. But what I'm saying is, walk a mile in my views. What am I thinking over the course of time? If you see some of my sketches of Obama, ignore the yellow streaks. That's what happens when you drink beer while you're drawing. You'll spill on the picture and you can't do anything about it. But I thought about Odetta. I thought about Ray Charles and people I had wished had performed at the inauguration as he was winning. Because I was like, oh man, you really want to turn it out. Let's get it. But folks, it passed. If you look at this here, my younger son, my son, I shouldn't say my younger son, when my son was younger, from when he was a baby and I first was working on this, he's 22 now, I took an ink footprint of him and marked it on there, just had to put his foot on there. And then gradually, till he's 8, all the way till he's 18, I would choose sections where I'd say, in this course of time, this is what's happening, this is what my son is seeing. Wow. And this is what's going on around my son. Wow. I spoke to someone earlier and I had said, I like doing art that measures the passage of time. Because, you know, what's that, Kansas, all we are is dust in the wind, time flies and stuff like that. So it's like, capture these moments, see what happens.
You're dating yourself.
I don't mind. Look, I mean, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. I love it. That song is timeless. I'm not dating myself. That song is timeless. So in some of these other sections, there's an area in Jamaica Plain for veterans who have lost limbs and stuff that I've gone to. And I've had conversations and asked if I could do some drawings and reflections, and I've talked about some of the things I've done. So way further on the scroll, you'll see people with lost limbs and things like that from conversations that they said, oh, I'll let you draw it. or the certain new prosthetics they use to help with bending and turning their bodies certain ways that I'm like, they're like, oh, I'd totally be up for doing that. So I'm really happy about that. Since Obama was the first black president, I always reflected on Jack Johnson, who was the first black heavyweight boxing champion. Because ain't a lot changed from the early 1900s in terms of how the media has treated it.
True that.
The fact that some of these are box form, way much further down the line on this, is a reflection of my face that I drew. Right? That's in a box form. I tried to use a style that Chuck Close used in his portrait paintings. All of these have extensions that go into it to say, this is my mentality, this is how I was thinking, this is what I've been learning growing up. And those extensions go into a Chuck Close type portrait I did of my son even further down. So this is hundreds and hundreds of yards. But thanks to Lee, we managed to contain it somewhat. Some of the areas haven't been finished, but they're finished now. I ended up going back, and what I do is I don't try to rewrite things, but what I'll do is I'll draw in the stuff that's missing. So some of the parts that are empty, I've drawn back. I've just gone back and was like, let me fill it in because I've been putting it off. If you like Tennessee Tuxedo and Underdog, you know why that's so significant. I saw you smile. I said, you know why it's so significant. The purpose of why I started this, when I was a little kid, there was this artist who used to do these murals all up and down Roxbury. And they were very political, especially down Dudley Station. And it was one called Knowledge is Power, Stayed in School. And that artist was Dana Chandler. None of this would have been possible if he didn't inspire me. Looking at his work and making it about politics and making it significant. There are other artists such as John Wilson. Jean-Michel Basquiat years ago, because of the graffiti vibe that came with that. What's his name? Andy Warhol. I can't leave Andy Warhol out because the pop cultural zeitgeist of everything. I'm like, oh, I love some pop culture. And when I saw him on WrestleMania 4 and on the Love Boat, that episode, I was like, I want to do some pop culture stuff too. And so when you see a lot of references, these are some of the prosthetic legs that I was allowed to draw just to see how they were experimenting on it, how to make it so it's quote-unquote more normal. But if it wasn't for Dana giving me that inspiration, I don't know. It was a jumping off point. Dana and my grandfather and grandmother, because when I had the artist talk at Fountain Street Gallery and when I had the other one months before at Spoke Gallery, one of the things I talked about was my grandfather and my grandmother had this house and they were antique collectors in Virginia. And ever since I was like 4 or 5, my grandfather had a display box that had all these political buttons of candidates from like the 1950s to the early 70s. So I'm like 5 years old, barely learning how to read and understand stuff. And I'm learning names like Spiro Agnew, I like Ike,
oh my God,
Nixon Ford, you know, Nixon's the one, and I'm like, fascinating names. So then imagine when you go to the classroom when you're 7 or 8 and the history teacher happens to bring something up and then you're like, oh, I know who that is. That's whatever. How do you know that? I'm like, well, my grandfather, when you turn the thing, you can see it. So I was always fascinated by history. The Dalai Lama, obviously I have a lot of love and respect for him. I actually went down Harvard Square and Medford, when he gave a speech at Medford, I was going to try to see if I can get him to sign it, but the security is deep. China got him scared. Yeah, the security is deep. So they were like, nah, you ain't bringing that piece of paper. So again, a lot of it's notes. And mind you, as you all are watching this, it's available on YouTube for free to just watch it and you can hear more of my narrative too.
Good.
How do you get it on YouTube?
Search Shea Justice.
Just type my name in.
Yeah.
There it is.
I got too many relatives down south who can't come up for the shows. So what I always tell people when it's an exhibit or an artist talk, just put it on YouTube so my family can see it. Because I want to make sure my relatives can see it no matter what.
How big are these again?
They're about 11.5 inches here.
Oh.
It's about this thick in terms of the roll of paper.
By 7 miles.
And let's just say I've done 7 rolls already, and I have one that's about this thick that I'm still working on now, which is a part of since 2005. And that one's the one that, you know, I've had a couple people say, are you going to cut it? When are you going to stop? And then when Biden took everyone out of Afghanistan, because he's a frustrated old man. He was like, man, I'm sick of this crap. Everybody come home. People got mad, but I'm like, I want to process exactly what we spent all that money, time, and bodies on. Because it's usually when stuff pops off and it comes to an end. Same thing with the Vietnam War. Then the books come out. Gulf of Tonkin, we find out who lied, who made this up, what did it mean, what's it about. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to wait until I get all the facts. And then I want to have a presentation that people can say, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, particularly with some of the places where we had Gitmo and all these other places where people were being tortured. Say it again? I'm sorry.
I was just saying that you've done a lot since the last time that we sat down and had a discussion about what you were doing.
Donald Trump made me almost lose my arm. Donald Trump, I honestly thought Dick Cheney was enough and that the carpal tunnel would be gone. Then Donald Trump, I'm like, 4 years? And all of a sudden now I need medical brace to do this?
Let me ask you one question.
Go for it.
How do you feel about the people that you meet?
The people that I meet.
That you put in your scroll?
Only one person rejected it. And I love telling this story. I've told it 1,000 times. That was former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. She was doing a book signing at JFK Library. I had it rolled up. My best friend Joseph Jones helps me usually roll it up and carry it. And I've had some of the most eclectic, weirdest people sign it. I bought a copy of her book. She was doing a book signing of her autobiography. And I brought it up to her, and I'm like this, and I said, I'd love for you to sign it. She said, nah, I'm not signing it, I'm only signing my book. And I said, well, there's a section on this scroll I've been working on about your foreign policy goals and how wonderful this was in terms of trying to keep things to at least a sane level versus what's going on. It was like, I ain't signing anything. Her security guards were like, yeah, you gotta take that out of here. So I got it in my thing and I walked out towards the lobby at the K Library and I was like, she isn't nobody anyways. Who cares about Madeline? So now I'm talking like a crazy person. I'm like, nobody likes you anyway. 2 people came up to me and said, I think it's really interesting. Can I take a look at it? And I started to roll it out for them and they signed it. Mike Dukakis and his wife Kitty.
Yeah.
And when he looked at it, the first thing I said to him, and I hope he sees this video, the first thing I said to him was, I don't blame you about the tank thing. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. I was like, I didn't hold the tank thing against you. That's what I said to him. But they loved it. They were like, wow. Yeah, absolutely.
My question is, how much do you feel like this project sometimes gets in the way of doing other art, or like do you feel like kind of this conflict of like how you want to, where you want to spend your time, which is limited as a teacher and as a human being, and you know?
Well, as a teacher, I'm lucky I have the summers off.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of times it's on this. Okay, as people are looking, you'll see where my face is and how it connects to what you saw in terms of the box forms. I don't mind the amount of time. The only problem is I'm trying my best not to end up on an episode of Hoarders. Because I have a lot of books, periodicals, magazines, references that the librarians at the high school I teach at, Lincoln Sudbury Regional High School, I always brag that they spoil me. I'm always getting the books and the periodicals and stuff that they give me to help support me on this. So it's a lot of times, some people say, well, how do you get so much done? I'm like, well, first of all, I do a lot of reading and fact checking. Because the last thing I would want to have is if you see something like this, people go, that's not true, that didn't happen. I'm like, no, it did happen. So I'm very protective about getting my facts straight.
Yeah.
I have a lot of opinions, but you got to get your facts straight. Anyone can have an opinion. You know, because a lot of people, what's her name, said, we have our alternative facts. No, I want to say it's a real fact. You know, yes?
I have a question. I think I missed this part. What was the significance of the vets you said that you captured?
The significance of what?
The Vietnam veterans.
The vets.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the history of veterans in the United States, particularly a lot of what I study, what I like to do, I don't want to mess with that, do the research and stuff on, if you look at post-World War I specifically,
Yeah.
all right? So he's agreeing with me. Before then, when you was in a war, in Civil War and all that, and your foot was shot or you got wounded, they just cut it right off and give you some whiskey and go someplace.
Absolutely, yeah.
But when the issue of what once upon a time was called shell shock,
Right,
which is the mental damage,
right,
years later they called it post-traumatic stress disorder.
right.
Yes.
The damage, if you look at how the hospitals treat our vets, and you always hear people say, you better support the troops. I'm a right winger. You better support the troops. Put your money where your mouth is. Half, a good chunk of those troops, we'll see them in Boston someplace. And where are those troops? They're homeless. They're messed up. They're mentally out of their gourds over the traumas of what they saw. And it's stuff that hopefully none of us in here will ever have to see, but a number of them went to see.
Okay.
So when they say, well, we went fighting for your freedom. Really?
So my only question is, I thought when I saw that piece of it that you have, maybe it didn't go all the way, but a little bit more about the PTSD and capturing, here in Boston and, what really happened. So I was just kind of fascinated because you had just had that part, but I didn't know if it was more on your canvas.
This is
about
just
that.
1 year's worth.
Oh, that's 1 year.
I'm very concerned. I actually met somebody, and I don't want to name drop to sound like I'm even remotely conceited, because I don't want to do that. But I met an actor one time who asked me, are you a veteran? And I said, absolutely not. But I feel for my veterans. My Uncle Rodney was a veteran. I've had relatives who were veterans. And it made me interested in what exactly it encompasses. And so when I talked a little bit about it, I said, I never had to hold a gun and do some of the things these people had to do, or go into these places and do the things that they do. But when they come back, again, a lot of them had to follow orders. They were told what to do. They were ordered what to do and all this stuff. And then their lives get shattered. And then they got to come back home. And if the pills don't shut them up and calm them down, and they throw the pills and give you a half-assed check to make you feel better and say, go somewhere with it, was it worth it when you're homeless living in downtown Boston, panhandling, people try to pretend like you were invisible?
Right,
Did you actually win me my freedom?
right.
And that actor was John Amos from Good Times. And we had a serious conversation about it.
Right.
Of course I was being a fanboy. I'm like, you played the dad on Good Times. And he's just like, wow, I really want to talk about it. So, I hope that answers your question. This is just one small section of something that's a lot.
I was wondering why you picked that part of it. I was
Depends on my
curious.
mood, my feelings, my thoughts, my process, the research I've done. So it really comes down to different elements.
Oh,
Yeah, it really comes down to different elements. Yes?
What was the one person that you met that made you feel the happiest?
Make me feel what?
Happiest. That gave you the most joy to talk. There's a whole bunch of people on there. I want
Leonard Nimoy, who played Mr. Spock on Star Trek. He come up on here somewhere. Hey, Miss Master, because he went to my high school class of 48, and he spoke at my graduation, so I was like, Mr. Spock, what's up? So I was all ecstatic about Leonard Nimoy. I was just like, Mr. Spock, hey, English Hyde.
There you go, guys. Yeah. There you go.
There he signed it.
Yeah.
There it is. The only part I wish he had signed was English Hyde class of 48. That was the only thing, but that's what I was like, so excited. Like I said, me and Joe were bringing it in like this, putting it on the table, and I've been lucky enough because he signed it, William Shatner signed it, and Nichelle Nichols, before she passed, signed it.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so when you look through the entire, I don't know if this video shows it all, but she signed it as well. And she was wonderful because she let me do an on-the-spot video of her giving a commencement speech to my Metco seniors at Lincoln Sudbury to encourage them to pursue their dreams and stuff, and she did it for free, didn't charge her anything, and let me film her. So it was heartbreaking when she passed, because she was such a wonderful person.
Yeah.
But I partly also, like I said, Republican thing with the Obama waffles and all the offensive stuff they do. I'm like, oh, I just write this down or I put it in here, and then people say that really happened. I'm like, oh yeah, just look it up. I noticed, what was it? Napoleon Jones Henderson here. I've been by his place. Respect and conservation of the history of African American artists in Boston and things like that. And that's also like a source of inspiration that I'm like, I like saving things and preserving it. You know, there was a writer who passed about a year ago, Kay Bourne.
Yes. Yes, Kate.
She made sure that the African-American voice in the creative process, artists, musicians, writers, poets, what have you, existed in her writings for the Bay State Banner. She was a big inspiration to me as well. I had such a wonderful relationship with her. She was so awesome. So a lot of this, when I'm doing it and writing a lot of it down and taking notes and doing the research, I like to consider it trying to archive this period of time in my life. You know, I mean, for God's sake, I'm 52. I started this like a gazillion years back. Yeah, someone said, oh my God, yeah, 1952, yeah. Half a century. But the process, it doesn't bother me, the amount of time. I just want to know. And someone asked me in my artist talk at Fountain Street Gallery, when do you know you're done? And I said, probably when the paper runs out. Yeah, I'm like, how can you? But once it is completed, hopefully I will not have shuffled off the mortar coil by then, but once it is completed, then the conversation can be about, well, what exactly was going on during all this period? What was he seeing? And that's the challenge. Like I said, walking a mile in my views. People can't walk in my shoes. But my views. What am I seeing through the transition of time? The stuff about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba that came out. That President Eisenhower was in on that. They had to shut that guy down.
Yeah.
You know, sort of like with Fred Hampton. So it's like, certain points, shut that guy down. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden, 40, 50 years later, the information, I mean, I'm sure everyone here, if you don't know, most of us in here knows, the two guys that spent over 50 years in jail for the murder of Malcolm X were completely exonerated. I'm like, wow, 56, 58 years, that's devastating. But it's not something I'm not going to write about.
Right.
Because I want to see it on full display. You know, once that stuff comes out. This was my criticism of President Obama, that I was like, he needs to be like Lyndon Johnson, get up close in people's faces and twist their arms and start trying to coerce them into doing stuff, which is how he managed to get civil rights bills passed. So I was like, oh, I like how Johnson did it, just doing a little research on it. And let's see, what else? Most of it is just, again, my reflection stuff. Whenever I draw Obama with his back turned, it's always because he pissed me off. And I'm like, he disrespected, he did this, he shouldn't have, I'm mad. So that's why I turn his back in certain drawings. Well, I'm like, I can't believe he did that. He did, I don't consider him some sort of superhero. He made some horrible decisions. Yeah. Up, hand on the
I have
back.
a question for you, man. How did
You can ask
handle-
as many as you want.
How did you handle the transition from Obama to Agent Orange?
To
Agent Orange.
You really want to know the honest truth? When that happened,
Yeah.
and when the numbers came in, the first thing I thought was white women are going to feel sorry for the votes. That was the first thing I thought, because you can kiss that whole equal pay thing goodbye. The first thing I thought when they did the stats as to what demographics went which way, and then all these college-educated white women, what have you, went with Trump for the patriarchal stuff, and grabbed them by the hoo-ha wasn't the deal breaker. I was like, y'all gonna regret this decision, because he's not on your side. And I think also class-wise, the poor folks who thought, he's going to make me feel better by sticking it to the illegal immigrants, sticking it to this and this, I'm going to be a white guy and I'm a superhero guy and all. I'm like, y'all going to regret it too. You not going to Mar-a-Lago after this. You not.
Facts.
And now look. Now you look. But that was what I thought. I had coworkers at my job who were like crying because they couldn't understand. We knew Hillary had what went wrong. And I'm like, 2 weeks beforehand, you told me your aunt and your cousin said they were going to vote for him, and your grandmother said they were going to vote for him. And all of a sudden now you're traumatized that the vote went the way it did. You know, sometimes you got to hit back, and you got to hit back with some hard facts about what this monster was and is and the damage. But that's what I thought. I was like shaking my head like, look what's going to happen now.
I'm experiencing this, not necessarily the nitty-gritty of the history of this, but it's more of the magic of this, the interaction. My sometimes wife over here, brought up the she got pulled in by talking about the veterans.
Uh-huh.
Well, this is the magic of this demonstration, of what you've done here.
Okay.
It's pulling me in for a variety of reasons, but not necessarily the whole experience.
Uh-huh.
It's driving me to think and to remember. This is a great experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is, though. It is. Yeah.
I said you're gonna make me start crying. You know that. You're gonna make me cry. Thank you. A lot of thoughts and observations, but also a lot of notes and a ton of research that when I have the time, I just go into it. And whenever I kind of look at this, I always think about, this was 2012, it's 2022.
Yeah.
The next one, if Lee can make the time for me and we can do something, it's probably gonna be about like 9 hours worth of stuff. So I'm like, yeah, it's, if once we go there, because January 6th alone will probably be about 200 yards. About 200 yards. So, as I'm talking about it, and I don't wanna spend the whole time because the video is like an hour or something. Remember how people were offended when Michelle Obama touched the Queen's back? And they were like, she's low class, look what she did.
Yeah.
I never seen her naked in a picture. Not like some other president's wife,
Facts.
you know, but think about what it was. So what I'm gonna do is, what I'll do is, instead of me talking all the way through it, because it's like an hour and some change, if anyone has any further questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, you know, I can stop the talk now. I wanna thank everyone for obviously showing up, particularly my fellow artists from AMARC. Because they're always sources of inspiration to me, and they're wonderful friends, and we've got a lot of things going together. But I really appreciate this moment. One of the things I did want to acknowledge before I'm done is I'm in good company. And when I say I'm in good company, Ricardo Gomez right here, a number of these other artists that are around here, a number of these, Hakeem Raqib over here. There are so many artists in this space right now that I don't want to just end this talk with talking about just me, the video, and what I've done. I just love being in good company with such great artists. That's one of the reasons why a majority of the art shows, I've done have been in group ones. I like it because it feels like you're in a jam session. Everyone has their little solo. That's what it feels like. Everybody got their little solos and their little parts, and I don't need to be lead. On this, yeah, I'm kind of lead talking about it, but I like to talk about and acknowledge some of these other artists here. So this is going to continue another 40 minutes and stuff like that. I don't want to have to keep talking and drag you through it. Couple more questions.
My brother has given you a shout out. We always have conversations about you. And I
This is
think
Jeff Chandler. This is Dana Chandler's brother.
Yes.
But I think my brother believes that you're taking his work on and taking it to the next level.
That's an honor.
So I just wanted you to know that.
Yeah.
That's an honor. That is an honor. So on that note, 15, 20 minutes, what have you, I'm all set.
We're good?
Put your hands up.
All the artists here, put your hands up.
Woo, what? Yeah.
There you go.
Come on, Quest, man, put your hands up, bro.
I'm not in the show, but.
In a moment. We'll get a photo of all the artists in a moment.
In closing, I'll just say this. Thank you so much for your wonderful attention spans and paying attention. I'm a public school teacher. Sometimes with the kids, they start going off the rails after a few minutes, but everyone here has stayed with it. Thank you so much for hearing my friend.
That's what you gotta do.
I really appreciate it.
That's what's up. That's what's up.
Just go to YouTube and search for Shea Justice. I also want to say that many of you know this exhibition is available virtually in a 3D gallery that you can walk through. If you go to our website, hbaa-mac.org, go to exhibits, you can look at the virtual gallery as well. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.